Carry your rags and get out of this house.
Ikena's voice cut across the morning like a blade. Nneka stood frozen in the doorway of the only home she had ever known. Behind her, her two children gripped her wrapper with shaking hands. The red soil of her husband's grave was not yet dry. They had buried Nneka only yesterday. And now, this.
This house is mine now. This land is mine. My brother is gone, and you are nothing here. You came into this family with empty hands, and you will leave it with empty hands.
At the fence, the neighbors gathered. They whispered. They watched. They did nothing. Nneka looked at the man who had eaten from her pot 100 times, the man who had once called her his own sister. And she felt the ground open beneath her feet. But Ikena did not know one thing. He did not know that his dying brother had been watching him quietly for many long months, and had left something behind that was about to bring this proud man crashing down in front of the entire village. What do you do when the people who shared your husband's blood become the very people who throw his children into the street? What do you do when betrayal does not knock at your gate like a stranger, but walks straight in, wearing the face of family? This is the story of a woman who lost her husband on a Thursday and lost her home on a Friday. It is the story of a quiet man who knew his own brother's heart and prepared for the day his body would no longer be there to protect his wife. This story will break your heart, and then, slowly, it will put it back together, because by the end, you will believe again that no evil stays buried forever, and that the truth, no matter how deep you push it into the ground, always claws its way back into the light. If stories of betrayal, karma, and justice move your spirit, take one moment to subscribe and join our family before we begin. Now, let's begin. Years ago, in a quiet village where the red dust rose with every footstep and the tall palms leaned toward the river, there lived a man named Nneka. Nneka was not born into wealth. He and his elder brother Ikena grew up in a small mud house with a leaking roof, 2 boys sharing one mat and one dream. Their mother sold roasted corn by the roadside. Their father carried other men's loads at the market until his back gave out. By the time both parents had passed, the brothers had only each other and a single hectare of family land at the edge of the village. But the 2 boys were not the same. Nneka worked, Nneka saved, Nneka rose before the cocks and slept after the lamps. He started with one motorcycle, carrying passengers up and down the dusty roads. Then he had 2. Then he had a small fleet of buses that ran between the village and the town. He learned to read his papers carefully. He learned to keep his money where greedy hands could not reach it. Brick by brick, year by year, he built a fine house with a real roof, a blue gate, and a wide compound where mango trees gave shade in the afternoon. Ikena, the elder one, did not work like that. Ikena believed the world owed him. He was the firstborn, and in his mind, that meant he should be served, not stretched. He borrowed from Nneka and never paid back. He drank what he had not earned. And slowly, a thought grew inside him, like a weed, that everything his younger brother built should one day be his, because he was older, and that was how things were supposed to go. Then Nneka did the wisest thing of his life. He married Nneka. Nneka came from a poor family in the next village. She came with no land, no money, no powerful uncles. But she came with a heart of gold and 2 strong hands. She cooked, she traded small goods in the market, she nursed every fever in that house, and she loved Nneka with her whole life. Together they had a daughter, Ada, sharp-eyed and clever, and a son, Somto, small and round and full of laughter. For many years that compound was full of joy. There was food in the pot. There were children's footsteps on the floor. there was a husband and a wife who still held hands like new lovers under the moonlight. And in those good years, Nneka never forgot where he came from. He paid the school fees of children who were not his own. He gave free rides on his buses to the old women going to market. The whole village called him a good man, a generous man, a man whose hands were always open. Every evening when he came home tired and dusty, Nneka would have warm water waiting and a hot meal on the fire, and the sound of Ada and Somto laughing would wash the whole day away. They had had little when they started, now they had enough, and they were happy. But the eye that watches with envy never blinks. Ikenna watched the blue gate. Ikenna watched the buses. Ikenna watched the land that now had Emeka's name written on real papers, and he could not sleep. His own wife, Chioma, watched too, and she had a tongue sharper than a cutlass and a heart harder than a grinding stone. And then, in the season of heavy rains, Nneka began to grow weak. It started as a small thing, a tiredness that would not leave, a face that grew thinner. The doctors in the town spoke of his blood and his failing strength, and they spoke in low, careful voices. Nneka understood what those voices meant, and as he lay on his bed in the house he had built with his own hands, he began to look at his family with clear and quiet eyes. He saw who came to hold his hand, and he saw who came only to measure his land. What he saw broke his heart. But it also made him do something no one expected. When the news of Nneka's sickness spread, you would think a loving brother would come running. You would think a brother would sell his own shirt to find medicine. But when Ikenna came, he did not ask, "How are you feeling, my brother?" He sat at the edge of the bed, folded his hands, and asked, "Nneka, where are the documents for the land? You know I am the eldest. If anything happens, these things must be in order." Nneka, standing in the doorway with a bowl of hot soup, nearly dropped it. Her husband was lying there, fighting for breath, and his own brother was already counting the goats before the rain. Nneka only smiled a weak, knowing smile. "The documents are safe," he whispered. "Everything is exactly where it should be." Ikenna left that day without touching his brother's hand. But what that visit revealed was only the first small crack in a wall that was about to come crashing down. The sickness grew heavier. The hospital in town wanted money, real money, for tests, for treatment, for a chance. Nneka went to Ikenna and knelt on his cold floor and begged. "He is your only brother," she cried. "Please, just help us with the hospital bill. I will pay you back with my life." Ikenna looked down at her and clicked his tongue. "Am I God?" he said. "Where do you want me to find such money? Money does not grow on my head." And he sent her away with nothing. What Nneka did not know that day was that Ikenna had more than enough money hidden away, and she did not yet know where some of that money had truly come from. So Nneka did what a good woman does. She sold her gold earrings, the ones Nneka had bought her on their wedding day. She sold her best wrappers. She borrowed from the women in the market. She emptied her own small savings to the last coin. She lost her jewelry. She lost her cloth. She lost everything she had ever set aside for herself, all to buy her husband a little more time. And while she did this, Chioma went from compound to compound with a poison sweeter and deadlier than any snake. "Have you not noticed?" Chioma would whisper to the other women. "Nneka was strong and healthy until that woman entered this family. Her feet brought bad luck. She is the one finishing him. Mark my words." She did not say it once. She said it at the stream. She said it at the market. She said it under the trees where the old women sat. And slowly, like dye spreading through clean water, the lie began to stain the way the village looked at Nneka. And Ikenna grew bolder by the day. One afternoon, while his brother still drew breath inside that very house, Nneka walked the family land with a long measuring rope in his hands. He paced from the blue gate to the mango trees, counting his steps out loud, pointing here and there, telling the young men who trailed behind him, "This is where I will build. This portion I will sell. When my brother goes, all of this becomes mine." He did it in broad daylight, where Nneka could see him from the window. And when Nneka ran out and begged him to have shame, to wait, to remember that her husband was still alive and breathing, Nneka only smiled and rolled up his rope. "I am only preparing," he said. "A wise man prepares." He had no idea that his brother, lying weak on that bed, was preparing too, and far better than he was. Now ask yourself this. If you were that woman, selling your last earring, holding your dying husband through the night, and hearing that the whole village was beginning to call you a witch, how much could your heart carry before it broke? But Nneka did not break. She held on, because Nneka, even in his weakness, held on to her. In those final weeks, something strange began to happen. On certain evenings, an old friend of Nneka's would arrive quietly at the Blue Gate, a calm, serious man in fine glasses, carrying a small bag. He would sit alone with Nneka for an hour, sometimes two, with the door closed. Sometimes Nneka heard the low murmur of her husband's voice, talking, as if he were giving a long and careful speech. Sometimes she thought she saw the small red light of a phone glowing in the dim room. When she asked who the man was, Nneka only held her hand and said, "An old friend. We are putting some things in order. Do not worry yourself, my love." Nneka did not understand it then. She thought it was nothing. She was wrong. It was everything. And then came the night the wind went still. The crickets stopped. The air grew heavy and quiet, the way it does when something is about to change forever. Nneka opened his eyes, and they were clearer than they had been in weeks. He pulled Nneka close, so close that his lips almost touched her ear, and he whispered words she would not understand until it was almost too late. "When I am gone," he breathed, "they will come for everything. They will push you to the ground. And when they do, go to Uche. He is keeping the truth for us. Promise me. When they push you down, go to Uche." "Nneka, do not talk like this," Nneka wept. "You are not going anywhere." But he only squeezed her hand once more. And by the next morning, the man who had built that house with his own 2 hands had quietly closed his eyes for the last time. The whole village came for the burial. They wept. They sang. They lowered Nneka into the red earth beside the mango trees he had planted. And through it all, the family pushed Nneka further and further to the side. Nneka took over everything. He decided who would speak. He decided where she would sit. He stood at the grave like a king at a coronation. And more than one person noticed that he did not shed a single tear. When Nneka tried to step forward to say her own last words over the man she had loved for 15 years, Nneka placed a heavy hand on her shoulder and pressed her back down into her seat. "The family will speak," he said coldly in front of everyone. "You have done enough." And so the wife who had nursed Nneka through every single night of his sickness was not even allowed to say goodbye at his graveside. She swallowed her tears and held her children close, while the people watched, and once again, said nothing. He was not mourning a brother. He was waiting for a sunrise. And that sunrise came on a Friday morning with a suitcase flying into the dust, 2 crying children, and a widow standing in a doorway with the whole world crashing down around her. So now we are back where this story began. The day after the burial, Ikenna threw Nneka and her children out of the house Emeka had built. He changed the locks on the blue gate. He moved his own things into the master bedroom before the soup from the funeral had even finished. And he told the whole village a story that fit neatly in his mouth. That Emeka had owed him a great deal of money, that Emeka had promised him the house and the land as the rightful elder, and that Nneka was nothing but an outsider with no claim to anything. Nneka and the children slept that night on a thin mat in the corner of a kind old widow's single room at the edge of the village. There was no food. There was no bed. There was no plan. She had lost her husband. She had lost her home. She had lost her name in the mouths of people she had fed for years. She lay in the dark and listened to her children breathing, and she felt herself sinking into a grief with no bottom. And then, in that black and hopeless hour, her husband's last words floated up from somewhere deep inside her. "Go to Uche. He is keeping the truth for us. When they push you down, go to Uche." She sat up in the dark. Uche, the calm man with the fine glasses, the old friend who came in the evenings and sat behind the closed door while Emeka talked and talked into the night. It was little Ada, half asleep, who said the words that made Nneka's heart stop. "Mama," the girl murmured, "is that the same Uncle Uche that Papa told me about? He said if anyone ever troubled us, I should remind you to go and see him. He made me promise, too." A cold and trembling hope ran through Nneka's body. Her dying husband had not been lost in fever. He had been planning. He had been protecting them, even as his own strength bled away. The very next morning, before the sun was fully up, Nneka took her children by the hand and walked the long road into town to the office with Barrister Uche's name on the door. When she stepped inside, the calm man in the fine glasses looked up from his desk, and his eyes grew soft and sad and certain all at once. "Nneka," he said quietly, "I have been waiting for you. I was praying you would come." He stood, walked to a heavy steel cabinet in the corner, and unlocked it with a small key he wore around his neck. He brought out a thick brown envelope and a phone, and he set them gently on the desk in front of her. "Your husband knew his brother better than anyone alive," Uche said. "He came to me many months ago. He told me everything, and he made me swear one solemn oath." Uche looked her dead in the eyes. "He told me, do not bring these things out for sympathy. Do not bring them out for the funeral. Bring them out only on the day they push my wife to the ground and try to take everything. That is the day the village must hear my voice." Nneka stared at the phone on the desk. Her hands began to shake. "What is on it?" she whispered. Barrister Uche took a slow breath. "Everything," he said. "Your husband recorded everything." And what was hidden inside that small phone was about to turn the entire village upside down. Barrister Uche did not rush. He was a man of law and patience. He knew that to truly bury Ikenna, the truth had to come out not in a quiet office, but in the open square, in front of every single person whose ears had been poisoned. So he did one thing first. He went to Mazi Okwudili, the oldest and most respected elder in the village, the head of the kindred, a man whose word carried more weight than any chief's. And he asked for one thing: a full gathering of the whole village to settle the matter of Emeka's land, openly, before everyone. Ikenna heard about the gathering, and he laughed out loud. He thought it was a gift. He thought the foolish widow had walked straight into a trap of her own making. After all, what could she bring? She was an outsider. He was the elder brother. He even had a paper of his own, a single sheet he waved around proudly, claiming it was signed by Emeka himself, leaving the house and land to his beloved older brother. He sharpened his lies. He rehearsed his tears. He told Chioma, "By the time the sun sets tomorrow, this whole thing will be finished, and they will never trouble us again." He was right about one thing. By the time the sun set, it would all be finished. He was just wrong about who would be finished. The day of the gathering came, and the village square filled until there was no more room to stand. The old men sat on carved stools in the front. The women crowded under the trees. The young men climbed onto the low walls to see. And in the center sat Mazi Okwudili, ancient and silent, his eyes like two deep wells. Ikenna spoke first, and he spoke well. He wept the false tears he had practiced. He spoke of his beloved brother. He told them how Nneka had owed him so much money, how Nneka had begged him with his dying breath to take the house and care for the land, how this stranger woman now wanted to steal a family inheritance that was never hers. He waved his single paper in the air. "It is here in black and white," he cried, "my brother's own hand." And the elders began to nod. This is the part that will make your blood run cold. They began to nod. One old man murmured that the eldest should indeed inherit. Another said a woman from another village could not hold a man's land. The poison Chioma had spread for months now bloomed in the open. The crowd began to turn its hard, cold eyes on Nneka, who sat with her two children, small and silent, and seemingly without a single weapon in her hands. It looked finished. It looked hopeless. It looked like the cruel would win and the grieving would be crushed into the dust a second time. And then, into that heavy silence, Barrister Uche rose to his feet. "Elders," he said, and his calm voice carried to every corner of the square. "Before you give your judgment, there is one person who has not yet spoken in this matter. The owner of the land himself." A confused murmur ran through the crowd. Ikenna laughed sharply. "The owner is dead, you fool. We buried him 2 days ago." Uche did not smile. He lifted the phone high so that all could see it. Nneka knew that one day his brother would stand in this very square and tell these very lies. So he left his own answer. "Hear now with your own ears the voice of the man you buried." And he pressed the screen. For a moment, there was only the crackle of sound. Then, across that silent square, a voice rose up. Thin, weak, but clear as a temple bell. It was Nneka. The dead man was speaking. Not a single person breathed. "My people," the voice said. "If you are hearing this, then I am already in the ground, and my brother Ikenna has done exactly what I always knew he would do. He has waited for my body to grow cold, and then he has tried to throw my wife and my children into the street. Tell me, am I lying, Ikenna? Look at the people. Am I lying?" Ikenna's face turned gray. The paper in his hand began to tremble. The voice went on, naming every lie, one by one. "He will tell you I owed him money. It is a lie. I never owed Ikenna one single coin. He will tell you I promised him this house. It is a lie. And he will show you a paper with my signature on it." A weak, knowing chuckle came from the phone. "Look closely at that paper, my elders. I never signed it. It is the work of his own hand. I knew he would try this, so I had Barrister Uche keep my true and only will, signed before witnesses, registered with the government in the town. The house and the land belong fully and lawfully to my wife Nneka and to my children, Ada and Somto. To no one else, forever." The square erupted into shocked voices, then fell silent again as the dead man kept speaking. "And since we are all gathered," the voice said, harder now, "let me tell you why my brother has money, while my wife sold her earrings to pay my hospital bill. For 3 years, Nneka stole from my transport business. He collected fares from my buses and kept them in his own pocket. Over those 3 years, he took more than 400,000 naira that belonged to this family. And last year, he went behind my back and used my name to take a loan from the cooperative, a loan I never agreed to and never saw one coin of. The papers for all of this are with Barrister Uche. Everything is written down. Everything." A great roar went up from the crowd. The same elders who had nodded for Nneka now turned and stared at him as if seeing a snake in the grass for the first time. Chioma tried to slip backward into the crowd, but the eyes of the whole village pinned her where she stood. Nneka could bear it no longer. "It is a lie," he screamed, lunging forward with his hand stretched toward the phone. "That is not his voice. Someone has faked it." But 2 of the young men caught him by the arms and held him fast. And then the oldest of the men, who had nodded for him only minutes before, the very one who had said that the eldest must inherit, rose slowly to his feet and pointed a long, trembling finger at Nneka's face. "I knew Nneka from the day he was born," the old man said. "I would know that voice in my own grave. Sit down, thief. Sit down and let your brother finish speaking." And Nneka, shamed before the entire village, sank to the ground like a man whose bones had turned to water. And then the dead man's voice changed. It grew soft. It grew tender. It was no longer speaking to the village. It was speaking to one woman. "Nneka, my wife, my friend, if you are hearing this, I am so sorry I could not stay. You sold your gold for me. You held me through every night. You never once let go of my hand. A man could search the whole world and never find a heart like yours. I could not stop my brother's greed, but I could make sure his greed would never have the last word over my family. The house is yours. The land is yours. Raise our children well, and know that even from the ground, I am still standing in front of you. I will always be standing in front of you." The phone went quiet, and in that silence, Nneka wept. But for the first time in many days, she was not weeping alone. The whole square wept with her. Mazi Okudili rose from his carved stool, and the old man's voice shook the square like thunder. "The dead has spoken," he said, "and the dead does not lie." The judgment came down swift and certain. The house and the land were declared the lawful property of Nneka and her children, exactly as the registered will commanded. Nneka's forged paper was seized and torn before his face, and the matter of the stolen 400,000 naira and the loan taken in a dead man's name was handed over to the authorities in the town for Nneka to answer with the full weight of the law. In one single afternoon, Nneka lost everything. He lost the house he had stolen. He lost the respect of every elder. He lost his name in the very village where he had tried to destroy his brother's wife. The man who came to the square as a king crawled out of it as a thief. And Chioma, whose sweet poison had turned the whole village against an innocent woman, now found that not one of those women would so much as look at her in the market. What you do to others in their weakness has a way of returning to you in your own. But here is the part that shows you who Nneka truly was. When the angry young men of the village rose up and shouted that Nneka and his wife should be driven out of the village forever, stripped of everything, chased into the bush, it was Nneka who stood up. It was Nneka who raised her hand for silence. No, she said quietly. The square went still. I will not become what he is. I came into this family with a clean heart, and I will leave today with a clean heart still. He has lost his name. Let that be his judgment. I only ask for what my husband built with his own hands, so that I can raise his children in peace. And the village, which had once whispered that she was a witch, now bowed its head before her grace. That evening, Nneka walked back through the blue gate of her own home, with Ada on one side and little Somto on the other. She picked up the cracked wedding photograph from where it still lay in the dust, and she held it to her chest. Later, she would have the glass mended. The crack would always be there, faint beneath the new glass. But the picture inside was whole. The love inside was whole. And it could never be thrown into the dirt again. She had lost her husband, but she had not lost his protection. She had lost her name for a season, but the truth had given it back to her, clean and shining. She had been pushed to the ground, but she had risen, standing tall in her own doorway, with her children safe beside her, and a whole village now standing as her shield. Nneka was gone. But the truth he had quietly left behind would guard his family for the rest of their lives. Family is not always the blood that shares your name. Sometimes the ones who share your blood will be the very ones who try to bury you. True family is the heart that stands beside you when you have nothing left, and the love that protects you even from beyond the grave. Nneka could not stop his brother's greed. But he made certain, with patience and with foresight, that greed would never have the final word. So remember this, always. You can bury a man in the earth, but you can never bury the truth he leaves behind.